Hey guys, welcome to my session on Coffee with Prabh, and today we're going to discuss about some interview question which is frequently asked in a penetration testing and ethical hacking jobs. I recently received a lot of feedback, Prabh, you making a lot of videos on SOC and GRC, let's make some video on pen testing, and this is the video for all of those people who are looking for the content related to the pen testing. For your information, I started my journey with ethical hacking and pen testing only, and later on I moved to GRC. My name is Prabh Nair, and for more information, you can check my LinkedIn profile. I mentioned a very limited certification on my introduction, so I don't want to promote myself like that. If you find my content useful, do subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss my future videos on a similar topic. So without wasting our time, let's start with the first part. Thank you. Okay, so one of the first question which is asked in normal interview jobs is, can you just explain me the difference between the active reconnaissance and passive reconnaissance? Or what do you mean reconnaissance? So reconnaissance is basically an initial phase of pen test where we gather information about target. Why they ask this question from the interview candidate? Because they want to know the skill, what is the skill he has, can he able to gather information, because based on reconnaissance only do you do scanning and other things. So sometimes they want to test the basics, that's why they basically ask this question. So reconnaissance is the first phase in which we gather information about the target. So example, like we have a web server here, which is a web server of InfoSec train. So we have hired the pen tester, and we told the pen tester gather information about my website. So one is basically directly sending a ping packet and get the response based on which he can get the idea. So this kind of a reconnaissance is called as active, where you're directly interacting with the target and gathering the information. Second is basically using a third party, like, I went to Google and checked the report about InfoSec train website. So it's same like, my friend is there, I knock the door and I ask, is Ravi is there? So that is active. Passive is basically from the third party, from the neighbor, I asked, do you find Ravi in the house? So that is so we have a two type of reconnaissance. One is called as active, one is called passive. So passive reconnaissance is the initial phase of information gathering in which attacker basically collect data about the target or network without directly engaging with it. So whenever you conduct the reconnaissance, we always start with the passive. And this approach, you can say, involve leveraging a public information, open source intelligence, and other non-intrusive method. So passive, for example, passive reconnaissance is actually designed to minimize the risk of detection because we are not directly interacting with the target. Like we're referring to Google, we're referring to third-party websites, and from there we gather the information. For instance, attacker might search for the domain name, which he gathered detail from a public website, or analyzing our social media profiles. So that is basically called as a passive. Once he done with the passive, once he gets some information, then he go for the active reconnaissance. Active reconnaissance is basically all about directly engaging with the target. Example, I will send some ping packet. I will call, as a pen tester, I will going to call the HR and I basically ask the detail about an employee. Okay, so there is a chance of getting detected. So that is why we never perform directly active. When we have some piece of data, when we are sure about something, then only we go for active. That's why first we perform passive, we collect as much as information, and then we go for active. So this is typically include techniques such as network scanning, fingerprinting. Okay, so unlike passive reconnaissance, active technique might trigger response from the target security measure and potentially leading to detection. So active reconnaissance provide deeper insight. Active reconnaissance providing more better information, because might be on a third party website, they don't maintain the updated information. Okay, but as I said, due to the nature of the scanning, it is always a higher risk of alerting the target organization if someone is trying to find his information. So that is the concern we have. So that is the first answer that you need to give for this question. Let's move to the next question. Thank you. Okay. So sometimes what happens, they want to know your conceptual knowledge or not. So in that case, nowadays I have seen a lot of people asking about how do you distinguish between the high risk and low risk vulnerability. Distinguish the high risk and low risk vulnerability. So that is basically the question they ask. Because what happens is when you run any kind of automation tools and all that, it generate lot of detailed vulnerability report of different assets. Then we have a task we need to prioritize. So by asking this question, they want to test the maturity of the pen tester. Okay, so let's first understand the difference in both. So when we go for high risk vulnerability, they are those that if successfully exploit, it could result in a severe consequences. Example like suppose we have a web server here. Okay, so as a penetration tester, I basically discovered some vulnerability in the web server, and by that vulnerability I can exploit and I can gain access to the web server, and by this I have access of PI data, personal identifier information. And because if this information disclosed, it is an impact from GDPR point of view or India data protection bill. So I know the consequences basically. For me, prioritizing and patching this vulnerability is first thing. So this is how you need to give an answer. So that build the confidence. So when you're talking about the high risk vulnerability, these vulnerability often involve the critical system holding a sensitive data. Or example, my entire web server is depending up. So my business is depending upon the web server. If server is down, everything is down. So I need to patch the vulnerability associated with that. So that's something we need to prioritize. And they typically have been defined by the concept of high likelihood of exploiting and require the immediate attention. On the other side, low risk vulnerability, while still representing a security weakness, but have a lower potential for exploiting impact. And these vulnerability might involve non-critical systems or less sensitive data. While they could potentially be exploited under the specific circumstances, but they are less likely to lead to the major disruption. So this is how you need to prioritize. That is called as a low risk vulnerability. Now question is how to prioritize. So we go for the prioritization and risk mitigation effort. So in pen testing, we basically have an engagement where we try to distinguish between the high risk and low risk vulnerability, which is crucial for effective risk management also. And here the goal is to prioritize a vulnerability that pose the greatest threat and address them promptly. And this also involves considering the factors such as potential business impact, ease of exploitation, value of target assets, and we also look for the regulatory requirement. So by focusing on the high risk vulnerability, organization can allocate the resources effectively, and by this they can able to mitigate the most significant security risk. Because sometimes what happens when we have a limited cost, we have a limited budget. With that, we need to pass the vulnerability. So we will basically prioritize based on a risk and impact. So when you give such kind of a response, it builds definitely a confidence among the interviewer. Okay. So let's move to the next question. Thank you. Sometimes what happens, interviewer want to know whether you have a knowledge of the tool. Simply just running a tool is not something nowadays cup of tea. So you really want to know the objective of the tool. So sometimes the interviewer will ask is which tool would you use for the network scanning and why? So my suggestion is that when you answer, first thing you should say is ultimately the choice of network scanning tool will depending upon the objective of engagement. If you give this kind of answer, I'm sure it will definitely confident, because sometimes what happens, they want to test your thought process. Because if you ask the pro hacker and all that, he will say, I will use this tool and that tool. But sometimes what happens, some tools are not comply for the business requirement. Suppose you're using some one country tool to perform the pen testing on the other country resources. So sometime on the geopolitical reason and all that, you are banned to use such tool. So by asking this question, interview want to know your maturity. So always say one thing, we have a multiple tool. I like multiple tool, but I will definitely go for that tool which meet the business objective, or it meet the objective of the engagement, which is available resource and specific technical requirement of the network. I will not use any tool which is not compliance with your network. So one tool which I always suggest is Nmap. Why? Because it is a versatile, widely open source tool which provide the comprehensive range of scanning technique. Okay, it is effective for discovering the host, surveys, open ports. And question is when to use that. So I would use Nmap as a foundational tool for initial reconnaissance scanning, especially when I need to quickly identify the active host, surveys, and open port within the network. So just having information about tool will not work. You really need to know when to use such tool. On the other side, we also have another tool which is called Nessus. Nessus is again a powerful vulnerability scanner which can perform in-depth scan for known vulnerability on the network asset. And it can also offer a vast database of vulnerability checks and provide the detailed report. And when to use, it is an excellent choice when you're conducting a vulnerability assessment as a part of a network scanning. Then we always use a Wireshark also because it is a packet analysis tool for a deep inspection of network traffic. Okay. It can provide you insight into network behavior, traffic pattern. And I would use Wireshark in a case where the detailed analysis of network traffic is required, where I look for the anomalies, suspicious patterns, and potential sign of compromise. So when you give such kind of answers, it definitely builds the confidence in the interviewer. Okay, let's move to the next question. Thank you. So sometimes want to know your leadership skill. That's why they ask this question is, how would you educate client about the risk of social engineering attack and the way to prevent? The social engineering attack is what? It means sending a phishing email, call that person, gather the information. So that is basically called as a social engineering attack. So here the interviewer want to know your leadership skills, your presentation skills, your convey skills. And that is why they ask this question. So my response will be, it should be, if I want to convey, it should be tailor the message to the audience. Example, if I want to convey to senior management, my message will be different. If I want to convey the technical person, it will be different. So different client have a different audience, have a varying level of technical expertise and understanding of the cybersecurity. So it is very important to tailor the message to the background and organization context to ensure the effective communication. But the question is how? So I would assess, like I will assess the client familiarity with the information and cybersecurity concept, and then customize the content accordingly. For a non-technical client, I would use some relatable examples and analogies to illustrate the risk and concept. Okay, second is I will explain the common social engineering tactics. Okay, so client need to understand the tactics attacker use, such as phishing, pretexting, baiting, tailgating. And I would prefer real world examples of each tactics, explaining how the attacker, exploit the human psychology. So by this, it can help the client to recognize the potential threat and avoid falling victim to them. So instead of telling them what, I will explain them how it works. Sometimes I will also use some real consequences. Okay, so as a client, he should understand the potential consequences of social engineering, such as data breach, financial loss, reputational damage, regulatory non-compliance. So I would share some case studies or recent incidents where the organization suffered due to the social engineering attack. And by this, I can basically also help the client to grasp the seriousness of this issue and motivate them to take the preventative measure. And last but not the least, I will try to build the culture of security. Okay, building a security conscious culture within the organization is crucial. Okay. And for this, sustaining a protection against social engineering attacks. So I would emphasize the importance of leadership support. I will encourage employees to report suspicious activity and promote the open communication about the security concerns. So this is how I will convey the things to the management, and this is how I will build the security culture in the organization. Let's move to the next question. So now, after testing your basic concepts, he or she really want to know whether you did the pen testing. So this is the question is, can you explain the step you would take to conduct the pen test of a web application? So I will say, I will first start with the reconnaissance. Okay. Reconnaissance or reconnaissance. Okay. Where I will gather information about the application such as URL, technology stacks, potential vulnerability, which include my, subdomain, IP address. Okay. Then I will look for the associate technology. So all those information I will gather in this phase. So IP address is there. Okay, I will gather the IP address. I will gather the URL. I will gather the OS fingerprinting, technology. All those things I will basically gather in a reconnaissance phase. Now, once I gather the information about IP, I get the information about the ports, I will move to the next part, which is called web application discovery. So here I will use some kind of a tool called burp suite. So we have a burp suite. Okay, I will use OWASP Zap. Okay, to map out the application structure and identify all the accessible page parameters and functionality, because that is the way I can able to exploit, like +1 or in URL, does it having any IDs, is the input validation issues are there. So that's something I will do in a web application discovery. Now third step is vulnerability identification. I will try to manually inspect the application code. I will look for the logics to identify cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting, we have a stored, we have a reflective. Okay, so I will look for the cross-site scripting. I will look for the SQL injection if possible. Okay, I will also run some automated scanner to identify the potential vulnerability, such as tool like Nikto or Archani. So these things I can use, but whatever the tools I've used with generating a report, I need to confirm that. So for the each identify vulnerability, I will try to exploit and validate its existence and potential impact, because sometimes what happened, tool produce a false report. So example, they have discovered SQL injection. So I will manually enter some SQL queries and see can I able to bypass. So that is how we'll do that. I will craft some kind of a payload for a various attacks such as SQL injection, or extract the data using cross-site scripting, or executing some arbitrary scripts in the input pages. So that's something I can do. And then based on that, I will report. I will document my findings, detailed report including the vulnerabilities, their potential risk, recommendation for the mitigation, and I will do the PRI review report from my peers just to make sure everything is accurate. So this is how I will do end-to-end pen testing, and whatever the data I gather after the submission of a report, I will sanitize the data. So this is basically shows your experience toward the pen testing. This is all from my side. Do let me know, shall I make more sessions, videos on pen testings? I'm sure this will be useful, and if you're new to the channel, do subscribe to my YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to make sure you should not miss my future videos on a similar topic. Good day, bye.